On this episode, we cover the Joe Rogan Experience 1315 with guests Bob Lazar and Jeremy Corbell. The No Rogan Experience starts now. Welcome back to the show. This is a show where two podcasters now with 222 hours of Rogan experience get to know Joe Rogan. Show for those who are curious about Joe Rogan, his guests, and their claims. Is for anyone who wants to understand Joe's ever-growing media influence. I'm Cecil Cicirello. That's Michael Marshall. Today, we're going to be covering Joe's 2019 interview with Bob Lazar and Jeremy Corbell. Now, this has gotten 66 million views on YouTube. That's just YouTube, obviously. Yeah. There's way more behind the scenes that we don't know. And this is Joe's most watched interview of all time. So, Marsh, how did Joe introduce Bob and Jeremy in the show notes?
Bob Lazar is a physicist who worked at Los Alamos National Laboratory in New Mexico and also on reverse engineering extraterrestrial technology at a site called S4 near the Area 51 Groom Lake operation location.
Citation needed.
Yeah, Jeremy Corbell is a contemporary artist and documentary filmmaker. Watch the documentary Bob Lazar, Area 51 and Flying Saucers, now streaming on Netflix.
Amazing. All right, is there anything else we should know about?
Yeah, there's a few things we should know. Mostly about Bob Lazar. We know very little about Jeremy Corbell. Yeah. And to be honest, that won't be relevant at all because he will say very little throughout this entire episode and even less of substance here. But we've heard Joe tell so many times how impressed he is by Bob Lazar's story.
Yes.
How this whole story impressed him. I mean, as you say, this is 66 million views on YouTube. It's his #1 most listened to show. So we had to cover it. And Joe finds, he said lots of times, he finds this story incredibly credible. He finds it very genuine, and we're going to get into some of the reasons why Joe says this really impressed him so much. But there's quite a few parts of Bob's story that Joe doesn't tell, presumably because does he know them? I'm not sure if he knows them or believes them. Yeah. It's hard to know. Like in 1985, for example, which is only a couple of years before he came out and said he was working at this lab, Bob Lazar bought a brothel called the Honeymoon Suckle. He also borrowed thousands of dollars from his parents, which he never paid them back when he subsequently went bankrupt. Although he did buy himself a $19,000 Corvette rather than pay his debtors, and his debtors were his parents. He was running a photo processing company for a few years. That went bankrupt in 1986, at which point he still owed more than $90,000, $18,000 of which to his parents. In 1988, he lost his house to repossession because of his debts, and his wife left him. Exactly a year after that, he went on TV to tell a story about his important work at Los Alamos, and he's been telling that story in interviews, in films and things ever since. And then a year after that, he was arrested for running another brothel in 1990. So this whole period of time where he was working in the lab falls into a very busy period of Bob Lazar's life. Between bankruptcies and arrests for running a brothel, he managed to squeeze in reverse engineering alien technology.
Yeah, it's got to do that on the nights and weekends, I guess. So what did they talk about?
They talk about alien craft, they talk about gravity-bending reactors, Area 51, and they talk pretty much exclusively about Bob's claim that he was brought in by the government to reverse engineer alien technology before he then spoke out and then had his history conveniently erased by the government, so there's no proof of him doing that at all. Also, they talk a little bit about how much Bob hates UFO believers.
It's really, really great. It's really great. So, before we get to our main event, we want to say thank you to our Area 51 All Access Pass patrons. That's Dr. Andrew Gibson, online physics tutor, Cindy Lynch, yes, that's Cindy Lynch, Stone Banano, Don't Thank Me, Your Show is Just Worth Investment, Gina Maloney, Matthew Cutler, Autistic Streamer, twitch.tv/MTC_streams. Sounds like Eli upped his patron pledge. Scott Laird, Chunky Cat in Chicago, is at the Nude Beach. Morgan Gordon, Left Hand Voodoo, Fred Arguthius, Carissa Gunderson, hello, Kirsty. Yes, you, Kirsty. I'm talking to you. Angie Matkey, Stargazer97. Darlene throws ice, not ice cream, into the haba. Billionaire oligarchs, Lucy Cortez, Laura Williams, no, not that one. The other one, I'm tired over arguing which of us likes Eli the most. We just need to agree that he is our greatest best friend ever. Megan Bray and Ram Tam Tickler. They all subscribe to patreon.com/NoRogan. You could do that as well. All patrons get early access to ad-free episodes and a special patron-only bonus segment every single week. And this week, we found out how much Joe really hates this other guest. It's a lot.
We do.
Check it out at patreon.com/NoRogan. But for now, our main event.
It's time.
Huge thank you to this week's veteran voice of the podcast. That was the Ice Coffee Podcast, the history of human activity in Antarctica, announcing our main event. Remember, you too can be on the show. Just send us a recording of you giving us your best rendition of It's Time. You can send that to noroganpod@gmail.com, as well as how you would like to be credited on the show. Of course, this main event is going to be about UFOs, because this is a UFO guy.
Yeah.
And so this is what we're trying to do. There's a toolbox later on unfalsifiability. And there's so many of these clips literally have that thread running through them.
Yeah.
So we had to, the toolbox was literally most of the show, and we had to cut most of it out to sort of actually paint the picture that Bob paints and tells the story. This story is one of the most important narratives in Joe Rogan's catalog. It's something he references often when he talks about this sort of thing. He talks about it to this day. He recently had Bob Lazar on again to talk about this thing. And he talks about it so much, he never fleshes it out in the newest episode. In the newest episode, if you listen to the newest episode, they don't even tell this story because it's such a part of Joe Rogan's sort of listening lore that you should just know it because it's been repeated so often. So
yeah, because we almost covered that new episode, but we decided not to because there was too little in there, and that's why we've gone back to this 2019 one, which is 66 million views is huge, kind of in Joe's backstory here. But yeah, that new one, they basically spend their time talking about a new 3D rendering someone's made of what Bob says he saw, which isn't quite as interesting as Bob telling the story for the first time as he does here on the show.
Yeah, he came back on when there's a new documentary, but what's so interesting is that this story gets referenced so much that it almost feels like Joe doesn't feel like he needs to even explain it anymore because it's been said so much. So this is our opportunity to hear this story in its raw form told to Joe Rogan for the first time, publicly at least. So we're going to get started at the beginning of the show. It's a couple seconds in. We're maybe 30 seconds in. And Joe asks sort of, tell me your story. Let's get started.
I first heard your story decades ago. I told you last night we went out to dinner. I've seen pretty much every interview you've ever given. I've followed the story incredibly closely. But for people who don't know the story, let's give them the bullet points. You used to work at Area 51. And Area 51, God, you went like, huh?
Well, we want to be accurate.
Okay.
Area S4.
S4. Okay.
It's about 15 miles south of Area 51.
Okay.
But
you worked in how would you describe it?
I guess within the Area 51 compound, you can call that a subset of Area 51.
And you got that job. Before that, you were working.
Before that, I had worked at Los Alamos National Labs in New Mexico.
And you were involved in what kind of work?
Nuclear weapon development, physics. I mean, they do everything there.
So how do they approach you to say, hey, Bob, why don't you come on out to the Nevada desert?
Well, the way this went down was at that time, it was 1982. I had put a jet engine in my Honda. And Los Alamos put it on the front page of the paper. Said, Los Alamos man, physicist at the lab, built this 200 mile an hour, Honda jet car that I drove to work every day. So I was known in Los Alamos, the guy with the weird car, and you could hear it from a mile away.
I love the fact that he corrects Joe. It's not Area 51, it's S4. It's important to be scrupulously accurate about this entire story, as we're going to clearly be.
Yeah. I couldn't find any proof of pretty much any of the claims he makes here. can't tell where he worked. We don't know where he worked. We're not sure about a lot of the different things like his academic history and whether he worked at Los Alamos. There's actually a lot of people who dispute those types of things and a lot of articles that dispute that stuff. We'll get into a little bit of that later. But just so you know, this is not starting out super great.
Yeah, exactly. We're going to cover a lot of those details as we kind of go along. I will point out one of these we're not going to cover other than this bit here. He's talking about how he was found to go and work at Area 51 or S4 because he was driving a jet car. He put a jet engine on his car. He was actually genuinely in the local papers for putting a jet on his car, but it wasn't a 200-mile-an-hour car. I had a little bit of a look into it. I found a link that actually explained the type of jet engine he put on. It was a Gluharef pressure jet engine. It burned liquid propane. It wasn't capable of producing anywhere near the amount of thrust that he's claimed over the years to be able to go that fast. It's essentially a gimmick. He's trying to make it out like he was this incredible physicist who worked out how to power his car with a jet engine and make it so much more efficient. None of that is true. That's kind of the myth making, the myth building, the self-mythologizing. In reality, this jet engine wasn't particularly fuel efficient and was a total gimmick. He also did a similar thing with his bicycle in 1977. Put a little one of the same jet engine on it and claimed it could reach 65 miles an hour. But these are just claims that the paper repeated. It's not like there was a speed test set up to see how fast he was actually going.
Okay, next clip. Joe is sort of asking him, when did you first start seeing strange things at work?
The first inkling I had was when I came in. There's this facility that is at S4. It's in the side of a mountain. And normally we had pulled in with the bus and gone around the front through a normal double door. This time that I went in, there were hangar doors open. I went in through the hangar door, and in the hangar door was the disc, the flying saucer that I worked on. I saw it sitting there, and we walked by it. It had a little American flag stuck on the side, and I thought, oh my God, this finally explains all the flying saucer stories. This is just an advanced fighter, and this is fucking hilarious.
Right.
So I went by, I slid my hand alongside it. I got reprimanded immediately for touching the thing. And there was a guy, an armed guard, that followed us in and just said, keep your eyes forward and your hands at your side and just walk in the door. So that was the first time I had seen anything that was weird.
Okay, so the first inkling he had that there was something weird was when he walked past a flying saucer. That was the first clue that something was up.
Sure. Yeah, that's a good indicator that something is weird, though. So good on you, Bob, for catching that. I like that he can be in the room, literally standing next to a flying saucer, but he can only look at it through his peripheral vision. He's not allowed to actually observe it at all. He's got to just pretend it's not there. He's literally in the room with it. They're making it seem like it's a wild animal that he can't make eye contact with. That's ridiculous. But this is sort of the myth making that he's involved in this whole time. When he's telling these stories, and pay attention to this throughout the entire episode, when he's telling these stories, he's making it seem like I don't have good answers for you because of the restrictions that were put on me.
Yeah, exactly. Don't look directly at it. Certainly not long enough to be able to produce any specific details you could then use to flesh out your story to make it seem anywhere more realistic and like it actually happened than what you've currently got. Yeah. I do love that he says he touched it and he got yelled at like he was Mike Pence on a visit to NASA or something. Like there's a little sign saying "Do not touch," and he's like stroking it or something.
He's like rubbing his hand on it, yeah.
But I mean, he says, this finally explains all the flying saucer stories. And that's, because obviously prior to this happening in 1989, there were plenty of flying saucer lore around prior to Lazar's story. And this is something we'll see picked up throughout him as he tells his story in this interview. He's bringing in details that sound like he's being specific, but actually it's referencing stuff that was just already in the general milieu of the general kind of zeitgeist around UFOs. Billy Meyer, for example, was decades previous, and he was talking about flying saucers. So all this kind of stuff is already in there. He's not offering a great deal of stuff new. He's just claiming that he was the one working on it, really.
Yeah. This next clip there, Bob is talking about this super secret place, S4, and how they give him briefings.
what was your thought? Like when you felt that and you knew that there was nothing that you were aware of that could produce this?
Then that connected me to the briefings that I read on the first day at S4 was that, everything that I had read was apparently accurate.
What were you reading?
It was kind of an overview. This project was to back engineer the alien craft. And specifically, it was to try and back engineer and see if we can duplicate the technology with available materials. Now, to do this, they split the project into many different pieces for several reasons. They do this on all classified projects, so nobody has the complete story, but they compartmentalize everything. Now, we had the power and propulsion system. So what the briefings they gave me were like a 1 or 2 page overview of some of the other projects that were going on, on the craft. The only reason they do that is just in case what you're working on is connected intimately in some way that we don't know of to one of the other projects. You have to know their, their existence. So, again, they have everything from metallurgy to, weapon potential of the craft. And these were all, essentially very short briefings. But mine was just power and propulsion. And it made it very clear that what I read was accurate.
It's okay. This is him explicitly stating that he was specifically briefed to reverse engineer this craft that was alien in origin. He's talked about, just before this, he's talked about the reactor that he was working on with his buddy Barry that he talked about working with. And their brief was here to work on the reactor and the power and propulsion of it. And his explanation is that he'd need a 1 or 2 page brief on the other parallel projects that are all working under the parts of the craft. This, for me, doesn't really hold up to scrutiny from a scientific point of view, because if you're going to deal with something completely and utterly not of this world, like not remotely Earth-bound, Earth-created, not from Earth at all, how would you even know which bits of it relate to discrete projects?
Yeah.
That's already making a huge number of assumptions that I don't think we'd be capable of having about an alien craft. And he says metallurgy was a different briefing, but and he was there to understand the reactor and the propulsion, essentially, the powering and propulsion. How was he to understand how the propulsion worked without focusing on what the propulsion the reactor was made of, or if it was made of something unknown to Earth previously? That would be a metallurgy part of it. How do you study a jet engine without studying the composition and properties of jet fuel? I don't think you can. He says there was another part of the craft, part of the team that was working on the weapon potential. Again, how do they work on the weapon potential without studying the reactor that powers it? Because you aren't able to figure out what its weapons capabilities are if you don't know what power it's got on board. So I don't think splitting it up in this way actually makes a great deal of sense. And it doesn't make sense from a secrecy point of view either, because it suggests that each one of these crafts, and we'll find out there were 9 completely different crafts that are not in any way alike. Each one had multiple teams, or multiple 2-man teams working on different aspects of it in parallel. But Bob Lazar alone is the one that's managed to speak out in 40 years. I think it would have been easier to keep all this covered up if you had a team of 5 people who worked on one craft as a whole, rather than 10 different independent teams of 2 who don't talk to each other. So I don't buy this from a scientific point of view, and I also don't buy this from a government secrecy point of view.
Yeah, it doesn't make a lot of sense, but this is a point that is going to keep coming up in this particular podcast over and over and over. It's that compartmentalization of how they had to do their research. That's the big key, and that's what keeps coming up. And we're going to find out that it's literally the reason why is so they don't have to explain things.
Yeah, exactly. But it just makes no sense from a reverse engineering of something point of view.
Yeah.
If you were to reverse engineer an F1 car and you were just looking at the engine, but you weren't allowed to touch the tires or look at the aerodynamics of the vehicle, you're not going to do much to reverse engineer that overall vehicle.
Yeah, it doesn't make any sense at all. Okay, so more on the briefings. We're not skipping any tape.
So when you were reading that, before you actually saw the reactor, what were your thoughts on what they were describing? If you knew that something like that didn't exist and they're describing it in the briefings, what did you think you were going to see?
I didn't know at the time. I mean, I was reading, I thought, is this some kind of test?
See if you're crazy?
Well, not to see if I'm crazy, to, a lot of times they'll take in real high security jobs. I mean, they'll intentionally insert nonsense into them. whether it's to confuse the fact or if for someone was to leak it out, they would carry that information along and know where it came from. So I read through the documents, but, I didn't know if this was, part of some kind of test or, or what, or was it potentially realistic? I mean, I really didn't consider it being all that possible as far as being the actual thing that I was going to work on at the time.
First of all, if you do go and watch the video of this this interview, you will see how completely locked on Joe is into this interview.
Gosh,
he was so intense, especially at this point in particular. This is Joe in 2019. It does show what a change the last 7 years have had on Joe. He looks like a different person.
He does.
But the intensity that he has here, I think, is pretty remarkable. I find it incredibly difficult to buy for a second that if you're in a high security job, they would fill your incredibly important briefings with deliberate nonsense to discredit it if it comes out. Because the amount that costs you by filling your briefings with nonsense compared to how infrequently that pays off, it's just completely out of kilter, because it means you're telling all the most important people who are working on a project things that are comprehensively untrue.
Yeah.
And then you're asking them to make like procedural decisions and scientific decisions based off that misinformation. It makes no sense to do this.
Yeah, and how could you do any work if you're sort of constantly under this impression that you're getting pranked all the time? How, would you be able to throw yourself into your work just to get the rug pulled out from you? If you think something's real and it's not actually real, or you think information is real that's not actually real, it's a terrible system. And it's just a really bad way to try to find leak things. Like you say, there's way better ways to do that.
Yeah, and it'd be bad enough if this was just about something mundane. If you're going to work on a spreadsheet full of important data, and they lie to you about how the spreadsheet works in a minor kind of way, okay, that's not going to kill anybody. That you're working with someone's private data, but you're told a bit of misinformation about a shortcut on the spreadsheet. But this is about something, an unknown reactor, an unknown power source that we will find out has killed somebody as well. We'll find out that someone has actually died using it. Imagine this kind of approach to a briefing around the Manhattan Project. We're working on nuclear engineering. We're going to try and make a nuclear reactor and nuclear bomb. But part of your briefing on the science involves some stuff that is a lie. It just wouldn't work that way, because you're going to compromise the quality of the science by lying to your scientists.
In this next clip, we learn about the reactor that's on the alien ship.
How did they turn it on?
The reactor?
Yeah.
The reactor can be turned on or turned off in a lot of different ways. The way Barry showed me, the hemisphere is removed. There's a small tower in the middle. When you put the hemisphere on, the reactor activates. The reactor shuts down. It's load sensing. So if there's no load on the reactor at all, it shuts down. When there's a load present on it, it starts up again.
Load meaning?
You can consider it an electrical load. So although it doesn't necessarily operate electrically, there's no wiring that connects any of the subcomponents together whatsoever. They just have to be in the immediate vicinity. The stuff is borderline magic, and that's essentially where we left it, when I left the project.
So there was no progress made?
There was some progress. I mean, we did identify, at least we think, some processes and had a rough idea, we think, of what was going on. But I think this is a problem that they've had for a long time. And, I was replacing somebody that Barry worked with prior to me. And I think there was some horrific accident that I didn't have a whole lot of information on, but, Barry alluded to that.
A horrific accident, like where someone died, or?
Yeah, where somebody died.
Because they were trying to tamper with things or figure out how something worked? Yeah,
the reactor in particular.
But yet he let you touch it.
Yeah, I think what they were trying to do was cut into one.
Oh,
now,
Jesus.
they had more than one there, and that was supposedly there was an unannounced nuclear test, and that's what it was. At the time, remember, they were still doing underground nuclear tests at the test site. But from what I understand, according to Barry, there was an attempt made. Now, this must have been a pretty desperate attempt, because it's not a very scientific process to analyze something that way. But it looked like they used a plasma cutter or something like that to cut into an operating reactor.
So the technology that he's talking about here, the thing he's describing, it doesn't sound like it operates like anything we understand at all, which means either it really is alien technology or it doesn't exist. And all we have to go on is his word as to which of those two it really is. And I think it's pretty convenient for him, and we're going to come to this in the toolbox section, that all he has to go on is his story, and that, no progress was made. He said, they tried, but they didn't really make much progress, which means there's no tangible outcome in the real world 40 years later even to point to that you can say like, oh, that was to do with this. That came from the fact of this reactor. There's been no progress and therefore nothing to verify or discredit the story he's put forward here. But then he starts telling us that someone died there in horrific circumstances, but he doesn't know much about it. Even though he replaced that person, he's there because that guy, like Barry's colleague, died and he was brought in to be the new Barry's colleague. There was nothing in the briefings about don't do this or it will kill you. That wouldn't be something you put in the briefing. It feels like you would. This feels like a really bad way to conduct science even.
Right.
Like, in that part of the way that science works is that you learn from past experiences and the past mistakes that you've made.
Right.
But there was a mistake so bad that it horrifically killed one of the staff, and you didn't even tell the guy's replacement so that he doesn't go and try the same thing again. I don't think this holds up. This doesn't sound scientific to me. What it does sound an awful lot like is the Demon Core incident during the Manhattan Project.
Interesting, yeah.
Yeah, so they died during an experiment with a nuclear core. Those experiments took place in 1945 and 1946. There were 2 incidents in which people died. So 40 years before Bob's story, and this is going to be a running theme that the things that do sound specific sound like something else. Like, when it came to those Demon Core incidents, we know that the scientists involved were Harry Dalian and Louis Alexander Slotin. And we know their names, even though they died during a top secret project, because when people die like that, the truth outs eventually. We don't know the name of the guy before Bob. Apparently not even Bob knows the name of the guy before Bob. Has no idea at all. But I've put in the show notes, I'll put a link to the Demon Core, the picture from Wikipedia, and I'll put a link to what Bob has described over the years as being the reactor core. And these look very similar, if you ask me.
I think it's sort of interesting that there's just sort of this idea that his predecessor just grabs a plasma torch to cut into it. It, like you say, it doesn't feel like anything you would do. It also doesn't feel like anything anyone would do ever. Like not even if you were researching something. Like it's like hiring an electrician to come to your house and then they just cut all the wires in your house. It's such a silly thing to think somebody did. And I'm not a scientist. I don't know the order of operation. If I were handed, someone were to say, this is otherworldly tech, figure it out, like figure out how it works. I don't know the order of operations, but I'm pretty sure grabbing a plasma cutter and putting it to the thing would be pretty low on the list, especially considering they hired a new guy after him who's going to come in and do other experiments. And I also, the other piece that's so important, you mentioned it, Marsh, and I just want to reiterate, the reason why you're going to be doing that research is so you could have access to that previous research, so you're not coming in every day like Memento forgetting what happened the day before. Like, why wouldn't you have a big book of things that says, we tried this, it didn't work. We tried this, it didn't work. Because if not, then just every day you're like, well, hey, how about we do the same thing we tried yesterday because we can't remember what we did and the previous guy's dead.
Yeah, the only sort of institutional memory you have is a sign which is like number of days since Barry's colleague died. And you reset it back to 0 regularly.
Yeah, it's like we've had 0 days since a plasma cutting incident.
Yeah, exactly.
All right, so now this is where they mention how many craft there actually were.
How many of these things did they have?
They had nine craft altogether. I only got hands-on with one of them. So I can't really say what how the others operated.
Did you see the other ones?
Yeah. At one time, and only one time, the bay doors that between the hangars were all open, and I could see all the way through.
And were they all exactly the same?
No, they were all different.
Different shapes?
Yeah.
But they were all from somewhere else?
Yeah, absolutely.
Now, did anyone make any attempt to explain or to to tell you where they came from?
No one is the least bit interested in letting everybody know all the facts. They want to give you the minimum information that's necessary to complete your task. So you're not getting the story of where they came from. You're not getting the story of how much progress other people are making. You just focus on the small component.
But they gave you some indication that they've been working on these for a while?
Yeah.
When do you think they acquired these?
I really couldn't say. I think they've been around for a while.
Okay, so he hasn't got the information on this. Notice here in this, again, we'll come to this in the toolbox, how much of this story he says, I didn't know much about that. I wasn't doing that. I wasn't touching that. I was only near one craft. I wasn't near the other 8. But again, if we examine this story, I don't think it holds up. If we have to take his word for it, that there are 9 different alien crafts that all look completely different, all different shapes. Why would that be the case? Is it that aliens have traveled here in 9 crafts that are all completely distinct from one another? Or is he trying to sort of float the possibility that these are 9 different flavors of alien? So we've been visited 9 times by 9 different species from 9 different places that all left a craft here.
Yeah.
Later, he's going to tell us they're from like Zeta Reticuli. So, like, I guess it's not, but maybe it's 9 different races of alien from the planet, from the Zeta Reticuli star system. But yeah, I'm not convinced by this.
Yeah, I think what it is just different dealerships sell you different spacecraft, right?
Yeah, it could be.
It just depends on. It's like a BMW, and then one's a Subaru. It's like a whole thing. The reason why he can't tell you a ton, though, Marsh, about these particular spacecrafts is he had to look at them all through the corner of his eye because someone kept saying, keep your eyes forward. Don't look over there.
But the thing is, like, if there was 9 of them, I would actually buy this story very slightly more if there were 9 things that looked similar. You know, that like looked like variations on a theme. So, you know, like a BMW and a Nissan both look like cars. Like a fighter jet and a jumbo jet both have distinct plainness about them. You can tell that they're from the same planet, the same kind of species of development, the same kind of genre of vehicle. Because to have 9 things that look similar requires way fewer leaps. But he hasn't gone with that. What he's gone is they're all completely different in ways that I'm not even going to describe the other 8. And then just to keep coming back to this theme of, is Bob Lazar adding anything new to the lore here? One of the first ever UFO sightings, which was the Kenneth Arnold sighting in 1947, specifically talked about seeing 9 objects in the sky flying in a long chain. That was the sighting for which the term flying saucer actually originated as well. So it's interesting that Lazar here is talking about that's what all the flying saucers were, and he's talking about there being 9 objects in his story 40 years after Kenneth Arnold's one. And then he's got this thing about how you're just given the minimum information that's necessary to complete your task. But your task was comprehensively understand this alien technology. I don't think there is a minimum level of information required to meet that task because it's alien. How do you even judge what information is necessary when you have zero idea how something works? You've got nothing on which to base the assumption of this is what you need to know. So I just don't get this. What if a very crucial part of how this reactor works is the context of the conditions of the planet where it was made? At that point, any scientist trying to figure out how this works would need as much information as possible so they can decide what information is relevant. But he's not thinking like a scientist here. He's thinking maybe more like an engineer, an electrical engineer. He does have some electrical engineering training. And if I said, here is a light bulb and here is a battery and connect these things up and I'm giving you all the information you need to do that, you don't need to know where I got the light bulb or what kind of battery it is. You just need to put these 3 parts together. So I think he's thinking more like an electrical engineer. He doesn't show that he thinks like a scientist. He's not the guy you'd bring in to reverse engineer alien technology.
When I hear him tell this story, specifically about the 9 craft, he immediately says, well, there are obviously otherworldly. And like, well, how do you know that? Like, how do you didn't get an opportunity to even look at them. You saw them one moment while you were you don't know anything about them, but you make a lot of assumptions about what they actually are because there's no way to check on any of this stuff. Nobody has any access to any of this stuff. So we just literally have to believe what you're suggesting. And
maybe they had bumper stickers next to the American flag. You know, I've been to Zeta Reticuli and all I got was this lousy craft.
But I think like there's a real strategic reason to do this and to do what he's suggesting, which is my knowledge was so compartmentalized that any real question that you would have about any deep workings of this particular object, I can't answer. I can't answer what it was made of. I can't answer how it moved. I can't answer how it was piloted. I can't answer how they even got it into the hangar. I can't answer any of that stuff. I can only answer about this really small thing, and I can't even answer that well because my knowledge was so compartmentalized. So he can get away with saying a ton of stuff that is complete speculation, and then when somebody calls him, he'll be like, well, I can't really know because I didn't really have access to it.
Yeah, and even more than that, that's actually one of the reasons that Joe finds this more credible. The fact that he keeps saying that he doesn't know about something. Joe thinks this is what makes it extra persuasive because Lazar isn't just filling in the gaps with lies. And he said that on multiple other interviews.
Just did, though.
But like, as far as Joe's concerned, all those gaps, he's filling in some stuff with lies, but he's not filling the gaps in with lies. When Joe says, what about this? He says, I don't know. And so for Joe, the fact that he's consistently said, I don't know to some stuff, and the fact that he hasn't changed some of the details of the story over time makes this more credible to him. But if you look at it a different way, if this is all just lies or a delusion, maybe, then it's far easier to maintain that story if you don't over-elaborate it or give yourself too many different things to remember.
Great point.
So you've remembered this particular version of the story. And if you never deviate from that version of the story, you never have anything else you need to incorporate when you tell the story the next time.
All right, Joe asks one of his favorite questions to Bob, how did it feel?
So they bring you into this room. You see this reactor working. You realize this is nothing that, as far as like the scientific community at current time, has the ability to create.
We still don't.
What is your life like from that moment on? Is that where everything changes? Because I would imagine the moment you actually make contact with something that's extraterrestrial, whether it's an object or a being, something where you can actually absolutely be certain it's not from here, your whole paradigm, the whole world you live in, is now a different place.
Well, this is the only time it became exciting. You know, the rest of the time, it was really an ominous feeling being at work. But at that time, it was exciting. I mean, now I knew we were on the absolute beyond the cutting edge of science. And I was so absolutely excited to be there every single time I was. This was a fantastic opportunity.
So we're 15 minutes into to Bob telling his life story here of this incredible encounter with alien technology. This is one of Joe's questions. This is a terrible question. It's an objectively terrible question for Joe to ask. This is what makes Joe not a very good interviewer. We saw that in other shows. Joe asked Trump very early on, how did it feel when you became president? Which is a rubbish question to ask a sitting president. He does it here. And he's long since, in this interview, asking, did this even happen? He's not asking that flavor of question. Now he's just moving past even what happened to how did the thing that definitely happened, how did it make you feel? This is the softest of softball questions. And if Bob Lazar wasn't telling the truth, if this is all lie, this is the kind of question he's going to absolutely lap up because there's no wrong answer and there's nothing to be caught out on how you felt. And then on top of that, Joe even feeds him the answer he wants to hear because he says, how did you feel? Did it make you feel like this changes everything? Did this upset your whole paradigm? But imagine if Bob said no to that. He's like, no, actually, this just felt like a Tuesday to me, to be honest.
He's just drudgery, Yeah. It's hilarious. Yeah, the how do you feel question comes back time and time and time again. How did this make you feel? How did this make you feel? And it's because Joe's show doesn't have it's very light on facts and it's all about vibes. So that how does it feel question really fits in with Joe's. It doesn't answer anything. And like you say, it's completely, it's a great way for Bob to just say anything he wants because it doesn't matter. This is just like how he feels. It's like, what's your favorite flavor of ice cream? Like nothing, it doesn't matter. Next up, Bob brings up a key part of the alien reactor, and this is a key piece that's going to come up multiple times here and in Bob's future interviews. It's an element called element 115.
How long were you there?
I'd say about 6 months or so.
And what progress was made while you were there?
Well, we came up with a bunch of reasonably good ideas about how the reactor worked. And one of them was the square base of it was essentially like a cyclotron, which is a small particle accelerator, a circular one. Particle accelerators, linear particle accelerators are just a, long tube essentially, and they accelerate particles with high voltage and, radio frequencies till they reach high speeds. But a cyclotron does that in a small circular area. And there's this very heavy element fuel, element 115, something that wasn't on our periodic charts at the time.
But it is now.
It is now, yeah.
When did it become on the periodic table now, the way the charts now?
I don't remember. Do you remember when they...
2004, Darmstadt, Germany, I think is where they first fabricated 4 atoms. They lasted 220 milliseconds with the atoms. It's nothing, right? And then it later was discovered a couple more times they could fabricate it. Then they gave it a place then on the periodic chart after that, called it moscovium.
First of all, Joe says, how long were you there? And it's important that he says that Bob Lazar's answer is, I'd say about 6 months or so. Now imagine not having a specific grasp of the timeline of the job that you had where you were reverse engineering alien technology, especially when you spoke out about that job immediately after leaving. Imagine you leave that job. Now you've got a gap in your resume. If you had a gap in your employment history where you're like, oh, I reckon I was there for about X amount of time. Yeah. An employer would be like, well, that's weird that you don't know how long you were working at a company. It'd be even weirder if you literally just left it, as he did in 1989, but wasn't able to be more specific than about 6 months ago. So that should be a bit of a red flag. But again, strategic vagary, it means he's not tied down to any specific dates that he has to remember or has to account for in any kind of way. Then it comes to element 115. You'd think it'd be interesting that he knew about element 115 before it was ever discovered, except... They often hypothesize about elements and where they're going to sit on the periodic table. All he said is there's going to be another element and it's going to have this number of protons, essentially. This number of protons, this number of neutrons. That is the amount of his prediction. That's not a difficult thing to do.
Yeah, predicting that we're going to smash together another group of elementary particles together to make a bigger element isn't a real prediction. We're up to 118 right now. That's the atomic number of the element that we created, and there'll be a 119, I'm sure, at some point in the future. And I can tell you that without actually looking at a hangar full of spaceships.
Yeah, I mean, even he doesn't predict what kind of properties it might have. He's wrong about the properties it has. He talks about it being stable and in what we've created so far isn't stable. But even if you were to predict the properties, that wouldn't be that difficult if you know where in the periodic table it's going to sit, because that's how the periodic table is arranged. So you could even predict the type of properties an element might have, and he doesn't do that here. And he doesn't do that at any point. And the other thing to bear in mind is he made this claim about element 115 in 1989, and that is literally just weeks after there was an article in Scientific American talking about the creation of super heavy elements, including element 115. So it is weeks after he could have picked up a magazine and read about the prediction about element 115, and then suddenly that became part of his story. Maybe it's coincidence. Maybe Scientific American was writing about the thing that Bob Lazar happened to be already working with. Or maybe he just read that magazine before he told his story on television to George Knapp. I think it's just another case where Bob Lazar's story is just borrowing from things that were already in the zeitgeist. Here's a quote that I found about that. Lazar said the propulsion system relied on a stable isotope of element 115. In 2003, scientists successfully synthesized an element with 115 protons, which they named moscovium. But contrary to his claim, isotopes of element 115 are highly unstable, decaying in a few hundred milliseconds. So again, he was wrong about the properties that this element had.
Yeah, also, I look, and this is an opportunity for someone in the audience to send me a message to let me know whether I'm off base or not. But I mean, I thought the reason why we do things with with sort of nuclear fuel is because it is unstable. Like the reason why it works is because it's unstable and it's decaying and it's creating that reaction. Now, I'm not a physicist. I don't know exactly how any of that stuff works, but I know enough about it to think that there would be a reason why you would want it to be unstable rather than stable if you're using it for a specific reaction. Now, again, it could be that this stuff is so amazing that it could be stable and it does this amazing stuff that we just don't know about, right? But here's what I think is really happening is that you can say a few really specific things. Like he mentions that they're from Zeta Reticuli. I don't know if we're going to get to that in the show notes or not. I'm not sure where it's at or if we talk about it. I think we do at some point mention it or cut the tape for it. But there is a part where he mentions where they're from. He also mentions what they use. But he doesn't really get into very deep detail about how it works, just that there's like a couple of really specific things that he mentions, because that stuff, you can have a very specific thing you say, but then never have to explain anything around it at all. And so it gives the illusion, and especially to Joe, that you really know your shit. You know what you're talking about. All right, Bob invites his friends. This is great. Super secret location out in the desert. Bob's like, hey, let's get some beers and watch some UFOs, guys. What do you say? Let's go out, hang out.
So as time went on, I started getting a little concerned, and I took my closest friends and just kind of got together. I said, hey, remember that job I told you about? This is what's going on. And you don't need to take my word for it. Wednesday night, we need to all go out here. I want to show you what's going on. So I took everybody and we went out to, remember, since I had the test flight schedule, and went outside the base, out into the desert, and so everybody could see, one of the high performance tests. And, it left quite an imprint on everybody. So they knew I wasn't.
And there's videos
crazy.
of these tests, right?
Yeah, but remember, this is it's in the dark in the 80s with a big monster sized camcorder, and you got, a bright light jumping around. But we did video of it, but there's no, by today's standards, it's.
But is your video specifically available? The video that you took?
Yeah, well, George Knapp has it. Is it
online?
Do you know? I have no idea.
Jeremy?
Yeah, I show clips of it in my film. It's online, and someone did a deep analysis of it. It was interesting to take a look at how.
Hold this microphone up to your face. Keep it about a fist from your face.
All right. To see how his video looks now, but as far as video evidence, I mean, we are talking 80s camcorders. The most important thing is the human story here. Everybody that he took up there on 3 separate occasions, they don't all like each other. They don't all talk. They all agree on one thing. They saw something that night at the exact point in time and space that Bob Lazar said. And remember, this is 17 miles south of Area 51. No one even knew really about Area 51. We're talking Papoose Lake, and they all agree. They saw something that night they had never seen before, and they've never seen since, right when he said it. So that's one of the 6 things where I'm like, how did he know? You can dismiss him. I tried to dismiss it, but some things we can't get around. And there's about 5 or 6 of them. How did he know about it?
Yeah, I bet you didn't try that hard to dismiss it because you desperately wanted this to be true. And look, to be honest, I think his, and then I took my friends to see this top secret thing. I think that might be part of the truth there. I think that is a thing that definitely happens. It doesn't prove that it's aliens. It just proves that he took his friends to a top secret base or a top secret area.
Yeah. A minute or two before this, they're talking about how Bob's life sort of fell apart because the government was bugging his phones. They had tapped everything. They actually had discovered that his wife was having an affair, and they tapped his phones, and they sort of broke the news to him very specifically. But somehow, even though the government's following him around, they've got they're tapping his phones, they're figuring all this stuff out. But he somehow is able to organize a UFO pub crawl out in the middle of the desert, and they have no idea that he's doing this. And this is not one time he does this. He does this multiple times, because you heard what they said, that multiple friends came up at different times, and they all agree they saw the exact same thing.
Yeah.
The other important piece is, and we'll get to it, I think it's in the toolbox section, Bob describes this thing turning on. So he describes the actual device, this craft turning on and lifting up. And he said when it lifted up, you could walk underneath it and you couldn't see it because the gravity system that sort of moves it around that he describes, that basically cuts out all light. So when you look at it, it looks invisible, right? That's what he says. He's like, it looks invisible. But here they're like, oh, well, you could just see the lights. Well, how can I see the lights? You said it was invisible. Which is it, Bob? Is it invisible or is it just like a bright light that I can't see? Which one is it? You're not very specific. And I put a link to this video in the show notes. There's an 8-minute video. I timestamped it so you could actually see what the video looks like. And it looks like nothing. It looks like a white light on black background because it's taken on a potato camera from the 90s. So you can't tell what's happening because it's super dark. So this whole thing where they're like, oh, we brought a camera out there. So, so people will have to believe us. I don't even know what I'm looking at. I could be looking at a dashboard of a car in a dark place. I have no idea because it's literally just a dot in a black background. You can't tell distance. There's nothing in the foreground or background to tell you how far away it is. It's a nothing. I don't understand how people can see this and somehow think that this is proof that aliens visited us.
Yeah, exactly. And other people have looked at this and analyzed it, and they've come to different conclusions. I read one particular blog, I'll link it in the show notes, that was of somebody who'd spent a lot of time looking at this case. They suggested what they were actually witnessing was the effects of a proton beam experiment, which Bob might have known about because he was there as a technician from his electrical engineering kind of background. And so that would have produced lights in the sky. So he brought his friends along to see these lights in the sky, and in order to kind of show off that he knows that it's there, but then told them that it was UFO, possibly as a joke because they were into UFOs or to tease them, or possibly to preserve some level of cover for what it actually was. So he's not breaking the Secrets Act by saying anything about it, by saying like, oh, you can see this, but it's UFOs. He's not saying what it actually is. I'm not saying that analysis is right, but I'm saying it is way more plausible than Bob's story because that analysis requires 0 crashed alien spacecraft, let alone 9 different alien spacecrafts with gravity-bending reactor technology. And I'm also saying I do love that Joe tells Bob's documentary maker how to work a microphone. And I can't hear a difference. I can't hear a difference between the microphone in the right place and the wrong place. I don't know if this is just one of those illustrations of how Joe does not appear to like this chap.
There's a lot of those. We'll get to him in the Off the Record segment. There's a lot of moments where this guy and Joe, they're not the best of friends, it turns out. All right, this next clip, there is an effort made by they to discredit Bob and his past.
Now, one of the things that's happened to you that has allowed people to discredit you was there's obviously been some sort of an effort to erase your past.
Yeah.
Some sort of an effort to erase your education history, your employment history at Los Alamos. In fact, the only way your employment history was proven at Los Alamos is someone got a directory of the employees from the past and read into it, and you were on that list. So it proved that you worked there even though people were trying to deny it, and they were trying to use that as a way to discredit you, that you never did work at Los Alamos. You weren't really a scientist. What was that like to experience? I mean, of course, we're talking about the 1980s, the 1990s, when you could get away with something like that.
Yeah, obviously there were a lot less records on computers at that time. It was still file cabinets and folders. But that was frightening. That was one of the first things
What happened?
I think George Knapp was the first one that uncovered that. I mean, he saw my birth certificate disappear.
It disappeared.
Yeah,
there was no record of you being.
Yeah, there was no record of that. There was
his mom
no
tells
record.
His mom tells me about that. Like it was frightening for her. He's got a real family. He's a real person. It's frightening for her.
But the Los Alamos thing really surprised me. And that they were so adamant that, no, this guy never worked here. Don't be ridiculous. And George went back and forth, for
I got the letters on the wall,
months. I mean, it was ridiculous. But fortunately, somebody came up with a 1982 phone book directory. I mean, and also, originally I told you, when I worked there, I was on the front page of the paper. So they were still able to archive, bring that back from the archives. And, Bob Lazar, a physicist working here at Los Alamos. So there was at least something there. But somehow George came up with the phone directory.
And then Bob took George with cameras into Los Alamos.
So here we have the piece of proof that he was genuinely there and was genuinely a scientist. We have him in the phone book at Los Alamos, and we have him in the newspaper as a physicist at Los Alamos. So here is comprehensive proof contemporaneously. Well, not quite. First of all, you don't have to be a proper employee at Los Alamos to be listed in the phone book. Short-term contractors were also listed in the phone book. And in fact, in that phone directory, Bob Lazar is listed with the denotation K/M next to his name, meaning that he was affiliated with a company called Kirk-Meyer. Kirk-Meyer was a small contractor that supplied support staff to Los Alamos, so things like data entry personnel, machinists, fabricators, electronic technicians. It didn't ever provide physicists or any positions of that kind of caliber at all. Now, Lazar was an electronic technician. He had some education in that area. We'll get to his education in a moment. He also had a bit of work experience as an electronic technician. So he was hired as an electronic tech with Kirk-Meyer, and that is why he is in the phone book there. Not because he's a physicist at Los Alamos, but because he's there to help make sure that the wiring is all correct on a short-term contract. What about the newspaper describing him as a physicist? Well, the newspaper is an interview with him about his weird jet car. And in it, they describe him as a physicist because they ask him who he is. And he says, I'm a physicist at Los Alamos. That is the only reason. He told the reporter he's a physicist. They wrote that down. They didn't fact check that. This is not evidence of anything other than Bob Lazar has said for a long time he's a physicist at Los Alamos. Some people knew him at the time when they saw the newspaper report, were surprised to see him claim the title of physicist, according to people who looked into this case. So this is not the strong evidence about his credible background that they're raising it as, or that it seems like it's being used as in the intervening 40 years.
All right, next up, they try to discredit his education. So we talked about where he worked. They tried to discredit that. Now they're working on trying to discredit where he was educated.
So there was that. Yeah. There is your education record. That was also like, what happened with that?
Well, that disappeared also. You know, that I've never gone anywhere for education. I never attended any classes at Caltech. I never attended anything at MIT.
You did attend classes in those places, though.
I did attend classes in those places.
Do you know anybody that you went to school with?
Yes, I do.
And have they verified that they went to school with you?
Well, I gave Jeremy some names, but the reason I don't say these names publicly is because every single time I mention a name, somebody gets in trouble.
They don't want to be.
Of course.
Yeah,
of course. But what is that experience like, seeing your birth certificate erased, seeing your employment history?
Well, it's frightening. It's absolutely frightening.
But it's also the fuel that the debunkers use, the so-called air quote skeptics.
He hates skeptics so much.
He does. So we've got the educational wipeout here. He says, Bob Lazar is explaining how it appears now. I've never gone anywhere for education, he says. Then he says, I've not been to Caltech and I've not done some other stuff as well. It's not true that it appears he's never gone anywhere for education. He's trying to make it seem like there is literally zero record of him being educated anywhere at all, which would be unusual. That isn't the case. A lot of people have looked into his educational history, so this isn't original work here that I'm summarizing. But what they found is he graduated from high school. They've tracked down his high school in New York. He graduated 261st out of 369 students, which is an important fact to know because he says he went to MIT. Well, MIT would take like the top 10% that they'd be looking at. He's way outside of the top 10%. So he was not looking like an MIT level student when he was at high school. He then went on to claim he went to Caltech. You heard him do it here. I attended classes at Caltech. He attended classes by a teacher called Duxler, but when investigators tracked down Mr. Duxler, he never taught at Caltech. He taught at Los Angeles Pierce College. So Lazar doesn't appear in any of Caltech's files, and he says that's because he was erased from them. But, I don't appear in Caltech's files either, and that isn't because I was erased from them. He does appear in some of the files regarding Pierce College, Pierce College is 2,500 miles away from MIT and even further away in terms of academic achievement and attainment. So it would have been a wild decision for him to be attending both at the exact same time period, because we've got evidence he attended Pierce, no evidence at Caltech. Then further into his educational career, there's evidence he did get a BS from Pacifica University, but that was by correspondence rather than attendance. So again, we're not talking about someone who is in the MIT and Caltech caliber of scientists here. And then as for his PhD, when he says he's got a PhD, when people asked him about his PhD, he gives the year as probably 82. And that is an odd level of vagueness for something like attaining a PhD that takes a solid dedication of your life for years at a time, for multiple years of your life. I know people with PhDs. None of them are remotely vague about the dates and titles or subject areas or who their supervisors were, all of which Bob Lazar is vague about. Most people I know with a PhD could hand me a thesis from like within 15 minutes notice, along with a detailed list of their mental breakdown whilst performing that PhD. Those dates and details are deeply ingrained in people's minds. So it's unusual that Bob Lazar doesn't have that kind of handle on his own educational background when you ask him for details. But notice what Joe's response to all of this is. It's not to ask for any specifics in any kind of way. He asks, and how does that feel? What is that experience like seeing your employment history and birth certificate erased? How does it feel? We're back to Joe's main question always about the vibes and not about the details.
Last clip in our main event. This is how awesome podcasts are.
People are coming forward, though, now. It's amazing. And by doing this, what you're doing, you're providing an opportunity just for Bob to tell his story. You know, believe it or not, he can tell his story. It's amazing because more people will come forward now that are involved with these projects. They'll come forward to you, to me. They're coming forward. And so what you've done here is provide that opportunity if they need it.
Yeah, because this is like an opportunity for them to talk about this and not get asked a single hard question. They get asked about how it felt to find this stuff, not where's your proof you found this stuff. Yeah. Those are two very different questions. It's just free publicity for them to talk about the thing that they're doing.
Yeah, exactly. 66 million views, and it has a Netflix series. Yeah, that's exactly what this is.
Yeah. Okay, we're going to move on to our toolbox section.
So that's the toolbox, and something just fell out of the toolbox.
So for the toolbox, this time we're doing unfalsifiability. I'm going to use logically fallacious's definition from their specific website. This is confidently asserting that a theory or a hypothesis is true or false, even though the theory or hypothesis cannot possibly be contradicted by observation or the outcome of any physical experiment, usually without strong evidence or good reasons. Making unfalsifiable claims is a way to leave the realm of rational discourse, since unfalsifiable claims are often faith-based and not founded on evidence or reason. And so this is most of what gets talked about this episode. He just makes up these really crazy claims, and then Marsh pointed out in the beginning, and it happens throughout, there's never really any follow-up on, well, how do we know what you're saying is true? Yeah. Instead, it's just taking his word that a lot of the things he's saying really need some hard proof. Like some things you say, you could say a whole bunch of different things. And most of the time when you talk to someone else, they're not like, well, I need proof of that. I need proof of that. I need proof of that. Because those aren't extraordinary claims. This is a very extraordinary claim that everybody seems to be hand-waving away the necessary proof you would need to know whether or not this is true or not.
Yeah, exactly. If I said I've got a sister, you're not going to ask for proof of that. If I said my sister is from Zeta Reticuli and arrived here in a craft with a gravitational engine, you might ask for proof before you accept that as true.
Yeah. All right. So we're starting about 22 minutes in. This is right after they talk about the American flag on the spaceship, and they start talking about Zeta Reticuli.
So you read through all the Zeta Reticuli thing, but then when you see the actual starship with the little American flag sticker on it.
Well, was that later or before? That was before.
So you see the thing before and you say, oh, this is American.
Wait, what's that before?
Hard, so many years.
Yeah, I can't.
Either way, it doesn't matter.
The days have fused together. It's so hard to separate what happened in each visit to the place.
Do you remember the thought process when you read that it's from Zeta Reticuli?
Yeah, it didn't hit me like a ton of bricks or anything. It was just like, yeah, okay. And,
you think it was bullshit?
I don't know.
You just were like, okay.
Now I don't. I mean, because when I read it, I hadn't verified anything. And this was just a bunch of stuff I was reading. And I thought maybe after this, they're just going to give me a test and see what I can remember in crazy information. And it would. But like I said, when I finally went in with Barry and had hands-on experience with what they were talking about, it took on a completely different meaning.
So I think this is interesting because he's saying he can't remember whether he saw the American flag on a UFO before or after he learned that there was a UFO from Zeta Reticuli. He can't remember the order of operations there. And he also can't remember when he read that briefing, he can't remember whether at the time he thought it was bullshit or not. I think that's a really interesting admission or omission here because, look, we know memory is going to be fuzzy and we change the order of things in the past, especially when they're mundane details. Did that happen before this or after? When it's, something really small, it's hard to be completely sure about that. But this is him telling us about the first time he saw a genuine alien spacecraft and how much it changed his life and shifted his paradigm. But he can't remember if he saw a spacecraft before he read a briefing telling him there was going to be a spacecraft or not. But I think you'd remember the order of that way around or not. Because if you read the briefing first, you'd be shocked when you read the briefing that you're dealing with aliens, but then you'd be already expecting to see a spacecraft. You'd go into the room anticipating seeing a spacecraft. You'd remember how all that felt. I'm going to get to see the spacecraft. If it was the other way around, you saw the spacecraft first, you'd remember being shocked that you were suddenly confronted with a spacecraft you weren't experiencing, and then you'd read the briefing after and think, that's where that came from. So your experience of reading the briefing would be fundamentally changed by the order, as would your experience of encountering the spaceship. Whichever event came first would fundamentally dictate your perception of the latter event. But he can't remember which way around it is. And this is just another explanation. So he's got confusion here. He does at one point, frequently throughout this conversation, we haven't really touched on it too much, when he's pushed on things and needs to answer a question and he's not sure how to answer it, he suddenly remembers he's got a migraine and it makes him really fuzzy to think and he has to slow down and take a real stop. And it's unfortunate that his migraine keeps coming up when he gets asked a tricky question rather than when he's repeating the things with very little pushback at all. But here's a different explanation for Bob's confusion other than migraine. When you're going to make a story up, it's really difficult to remember to be consistent in the order of the fake things happening. Yeah. It's why one of the ways to catch people out on a lie is to get them to tell the chronology of their story backwards. Because people practice the lie in a linear chronology, but it's very hard on the fly to work that out backwards. What did you do last? And what did you do immediately before that? And what did you do immediately? It's very difficult to do that because we haven't practiced that. And it's very easy for you to do that with something that's real. It's very difficult for you to do that with the story you've made up. And I think that's where Bob's confusion is here, was he can't remember which way around these details are meant to go, and he doesn't want to commit too much on it.
And what Bob doesn't realize is he's already told us the answer to this, right? And he told us the answer early on when he said he first saw the craft. He said, I saw a flag on it, and the flag tells me that I see now, these are craft that America has, and this is where all the rumors are coming from. This is where all the spaceship rumors are coming from. He says that in the beginning of this interview. So he says, when I saw the American flag, I was like, that's something we made. Well, then obviously you wouldn't think it's from Zeta Reticuli because we don't outsource that work to Zeta Reticuli. So obviously it's not the order of operations. You already told us, and now you can't remember.
Yeah, that's a great catch. That's an absolutely great catch. Here's another, I think, interesting detail. Is it a coincidence that Betty and Barney Hill, with their famous alien visitation story, those aliens were also from Zeta Reticuli, which was 30 years earlier? Yeah. So either Bob is just borrowing parts of that story, or it's just true that we're routinely visited by aliens from Zeta Reticuli, and both Bob and Betty and Barney have all experienced it. It's one of those two things.
We're a hot spot for Zeta Reticulans to come here and hang out. So it's a big thing. All right. So this is where they're talking about what the craft actually looked like.
So at the time, you having a firm knowledge of the periodic chart and knowing what was real and what wasn't real, what was your reaction to having this stable element 115 that wasn't even supposed to exist?
Well, everything was impossible.
Right.
I mean, down to the metal. I did get a chance to look inside the craft on only one occasion. And this was important because where the reactor sat might have been critical to how it operated, since everything operates without any interconnection. So the placement of components might be critical. So they allowed me to go inside and look at it. Again, I forgot where the hell I am.
So you're going into this craft, and what are you thinking when you're inside of it? Like, what are you seeing?
It's a very ominous feeling because there are no, first of all, everything is one color. It's like a dark pewter color, and there are no right angles anywhere. It's as if somebody took, I've said this before, somebody took a model and fashioned it out of wax and then heated it just for a short time so everything melted. Everything looks like it's fused together. Everything has a radius of curvature where two items meet. It's a really weird looking thing, but there was almost nothing other than a small foldable hatchway that looked recognizable. Everything was really unworldly, to pick on it, a way to describe it.
I mean, I would expect that from something that literally came from another world. That feels like a pretty apt adjective to use.
Yeah, exactly that. I love at the start that Joe says, having a firm knowledge of the periodic chart as you do, conjecture, Your Honor, we haven't established that Bob Lazar had a firm knowledge of the periodic chart. He was an electronic technician. He didn't, I haven't got a firm knowledge. I'm not sure he would have necessarily. Maybe he did, but we haven't established it.
Could be.
But yeah, I think it's true that knowing how the reactor that he's working on, how it sat in the craft, and also what it connected to. He says it didn't connect with wires and stuff, but it must have connected in some kind of way, even if that was some sort of like wireless or gravitational or magnetic. It's going to interact with something around it. Having that would be really vital context that any scientist would need, or they tell you that they needed in order to understand how this thing worked. So like it doesn't hold up to scrutiny that he's just given this reactor in total isolation and saying, figure out how this powered a craft that you're not allowed to touch. So much of this just shows that these aren't the reactions of a scientist who's been tasked to study a reactor. He's talking about the color, he's talking about the color of the metal and the shapes, but he said the metal was impossible. How was the metal impossible? You just said it was an impossible metal, but what properties did the metal have that made it so unusual? And what tests did you run on this metal that gave you the results that told you this? And what were those results? Instead, he's telling us the kind of observational details that you could just imagine if you imagined a spacecraft.
Yeah. It doesn't feel like a scientist who's talking about this. It kind of feels like an interior designer talking about it. That doesn't sound like anything a scientist would say.
If he's a scientist and he's talking about the metal, he might talk about the conductivity of the metal and how well it compares to steel or copper. Or he might talk about whether it had, whether it was a magnetic metal or whether it was more like an aluminium. Like he'd talk about the physical properties of the metal to tell us, but he's telling us it's impossible. So what is impossible? What properties are impossible about this metal? You haven't got that information because you're not a scientist and you haven't worked on it.
Okay, so they talk about the size of the craft.
So you get inside this thing, and it's designed for something that's much smaller than a human being.
Yeah, you can't really stand up till you get to the very center of it.
And how tall are you?
I'm 5'10".
And what do you think this was designed for?
I'd say something close to half my height.
Wow. So these little 3-foot tallish creatures. Yeah,
and the seats were small too. I mean, obviously it was made, for something small. But there is no, there's nothing else in there. There's just seats, the reactor, and some of the subcomponents. There's no control panels. There's no bathroom. There's no decorative components or artwork or anything that you would recognize or trim. I mean, it's just a very bare bones thing.
You're not seeing any screens?
Well, there are archways around it that are part of the superstructure, and one of the archways can become transparent. When I was in there was another group working on one of the archways, and you could call that a screen. more or less.
So through that archway, it would maintain the solidity, the solid, whatever metal it was.
Yeah.
But you could see through
it just became transparent. Yeah. I saw that happen once or twice before I left.
Did you ask any questions about what the fuck that was?
No, there's no asking questions. No.
But when you watch something become transparent and you realize it's still there, but you can now see through it.
Yeah, I mean, now that's not that impressive. We do have some liquid crystal materials that are like that. You know, they have
seen that in bathrooms.
Smart glass. Yeah, they call it smart glass. So this is just, and I don't know if the craft is made of, an advanced metal or a ceramic. It was cold to the touch. So, I would lean more towards a metal.
So again, he's saying a lot of stuff here that you think might sound specific, but it's totally unfalsifiable. There's nothing we can say he's not proving this in any kind of way. We can't ask questions that would test this hypothesis. You just take his word for it. So much so that he said, like Joe asks what the height of these creatures would be. And, he offers how big he thinks they are. And Joe just takes the size completely at face value. He goes, whoa, when he hears about the size of them. There's no questions. He just accepts it as true.
Yeah. And the way he's talking about it, he talks about it like a car. He's like, well, there's no trim, also no power windows. It was a pretty stock vehicle when you come right down to it.
He says there's no bathrooms in it. Like, those are the details he's highlighting. These aren't the details that a scientist, they're barely even the details an engineer would highlight about a craft. But also think about it this way. Isn't it incredibly convenient that there were no other distinguishing features that Bob would otherwise need to then remember? Because if there were a load of panels with a load of symbols on it, he'd then have to remember a load of alien symbols that he said that one time. And that's a very difficult thing to hold in mind, especially when we've seen how well Bob's memory can work over 40 years.
Yeah, man.
Except when Joe asks, well, what about a screen? Lo and behold, a screen suddenly appears in Bob's story in order to placate Joe's vision of what's inside this. Because Bob thinks, I think I could handle a screen being in here.
I like to, Bob's like, I don't know if the craft was made out of advanced metal or ceramic. It was cold to the touch, so I'd lean more towards the metal. Ceramic is also cold to the touch, Bob. Like, I don't know what you're talking about. You're just choosing something for no reason here. I just want to reiterate, because he mentions it here. He's like, I didn't answer any questions. Like, he's some sort of like, what do they call those guys? Those crazy people who think they're above the law. Sovereign citizen. He thinks he's like a sovereign citizen. Like, I don't answer questions. I'm sorry, I won't answer your question. Am I being detained here? But the whole time he keeps bringing this up, and he keeps doing it as a cop out. Like, when Joe asks a question, Joe says to him, "What about this?" He's like, "Oh, you can't ask any questions." So immediately he cuts off that avenue that you would use to then maybe ask more and deeper questions by just saying, well, they wouldn't answer any questions, so I can't answer your questions. And it's really convenient that that's how that works.
Yeah, but it's also would be deeply inconvenient for a scientific study of a craft.
Any way to work,
Why would you even let Bob see the craft if he's not allowed to ask any questions of anyone else who studied the craft? As a scientist, are we just going to be going based on what he can assume and then never share information about it? It just doesn't stand up to scrutiny at all.
Yeah. And then, like, the way he makes it seem like there's all these different teams of people who are working on these different ships. Well, if they can't communicate with each other, they could all be trying the exact same thing, and it could be failing time and time again. And then they just wasted 10 people's time instead of just 2 people's time. It doesn't make any sense to not communicate these things. There's no reason why you would do that. It doesn't make any sense except for if you wanted to lie about it. That's the only thing I could imagine that you would want to say that happened.
Yeah, how many other teams lost somebody like Bob's predecessor? Like, the attrition rate on these teams was incredibly high because no one said, oh, by the way, don't touch that thing.
All right. Now they talk about piloting the actual craft.
And when you see this craft and you're inside, was there any indication that there was an area that they would use to control it, to pilot it? Was there a pilot seat? There were 3 seats. They sat around. The reactor was in the dead center of it. And then equidistant around there were 3 seats. That's all. There was a large, they're not consoles. They're large rectangular objects, also spaced equidistant around the center.
There's nothing on them. There's no buttons. There's no lights. There's
and
no
they
controls.
Look the same color, the same
Everything
thing.
is the same
It's
color.
just a different shape.
Right. And directly underneath them, there's 3 levels in the craft. The main level is what we're talking about. Directly under that, those are the gravity amplifiers, the big rectangular objects. Underneath them are the gravity emitters that look like, for lack of a better word, a trash can hanging on a pipe. 3 of those. And then the top layer, this is just my personal belief, I think that has to do with a navigation or their version of a computer with some planar panels, sensor panels around the craft that we would call portholes, but they're not portholes. They're just black areas. And I think that just determines its, position in space. But I physically was in the center section, and I stuck my torso in the bottom section and hung upside down so I could see how the gravity amplifiers were positioned.
So, yeah, cool story. But again, all we have here is to take his word for all of this. There's no corroboration. There's no even attempted corroboration. There's no even attempt at saying, and this, you can check it in this kind of a way. It's just believe me. But then what has he told us in this one clip? There are seats. And then the reactor was in the dead center of the craft with the 3 pilots then arranged, gathered around that reactor. And I would say, how convenient that the thing that he just happened to be tasked to work on and then happened to come out and talk about was absolutely central, both narratively and physically within this craft. Of all of the things, he is working on the reactor that is essentially the propulsion system, the power system of the craft. How many crafts sit the power in the middle of the craft and then everybody arranges around? That's not how a jet works. Your car doesn't have the engine in the middle of all of the seats. But in Bob's thing, the thing that he was working on was literally central in this entire craft. And then all the other details, nothing else of note. No color, no lights, no symbols. Again, none of the kind of details that you'd need to be consistent about and remember over 4 decades of storytelling. There's just 3 seats and my thing in the middle. He then does offer us some thoughts, some kind of speculation about parts of it, but that's just speculation. He says part of speculation because it wasn't part of his brief. So he shouldn't have too much information. You therefore can't ask him much information about it because how would he know? He wasn't working on that bit. Nobody who knows anything about that bit is here to answer your questions, so they'll forever go unanswered. There's no falsifiability. There is no verification possible.
I will say that he was complaining that it didn't have any trim, but it does have 3rd row seating. So that is an upgrade, admittedly. All right, next up, we're talking about Bob's workload.
And there was several teams that were working on the propulsion system? So there was different teams that were working on these different aircrafts?
I don't know. I could only assume.
Right. Now, when you're sitting in this thing and you're looking at this otherworldly craft, your goal is to try to figure out how this thing functions. Your goal is to try to figure out how this reactor, but you would imagine they would give you more time than just one day to check that out.
Oh, it wasn't one day.
Right.
Yeah, Barry was there. I think Barry was sleeping there. I'm sure they had. Now, that isn't weird. Up at the Tonopah test range where they work on stealth fighters, you go, I think, 3 weeks on, 1 week off, and you stay up there too. So it's not weird to stay up at the test site.
Right.
So, I think he pretty much, and he acted like he's been up there for a long time.
Yeah.
But
he's still there.
Yeah. Who knows?
Do you have contact with this guy?
No. Oh, no. I wish I did. I kind of thought he was going to come out after I did.
Right.
And I think I took so much flack and it's so much shit for what went on. I think I wound up helping security there, and everybody became afraid of, doing or saying anything after that.
So again, we have really only a very vague sense of how long Bob was meant to be tasked to this project. He said earlier it's about 6 months. That's the closest that he can give us. But that's so vague that notice even Joe is unsure about the time that he's there. Joe says, how long were we there? Was it more than a day? So Joe, who's like a massive fan, who says he's seen every single interview Bob Lazar has ever done, has no clue as to what duration of time Bob Lazar was working at this facility. And that isn't because Joe, it's not because Joe isn't paying attention. It's because Bob Lazar isn't being specific. And I would argue that's maybe deliberate. Because even 6 months, let's say it's about 6 months, why would you bring in a team to study alien propulsion and then expect them to crack it within months? The only thing that would make sense would be a period of years to work on something like that. But then it can't be a period of years because that wouldn't fit with his bankruptcy in 1988 or his arrest for running a brothel in 1990. And it's like Bob Lazar has painted his story into a chronological corner that he can only get out of if he prevents anyone from noticing where the walls are. If you don't know where the possible boundaries of this are, because he stays vague, then you can't ask the kind of questions that we're asking now. And then we'll think of the rest of this vagueness. We've got no idea what happened to Barry. Barry who? We don't even know his name. Could we even pick Barry out of a lineup in any way? Did he also not have any distinguishing features, no color, no symbols, no lights? Like, but Barry is as featureless as the craft. He's just a guy called Barry. What's interesting to me is a minute after this clip, Bob starts talking about who his supervisor was. His supervisor was a guy called Dennis Mariani. Nobody's been able to track down this Dennis Mariani character. People thought they'd found obituaries for him online and they made the leap, but actually it turns out that was definitely not the same guy who wasn't in the same area, didn't do the same job. But it's interesting that he's really happy to give Dennis Mariani's full name, but we never get more than Barry. The guy he worked with side by side, guy who was sleeping in the facility for 6 months. And also, we don't even get Barry for the person who died. We don't even get a first name of the person who died experimenting here. There are so many holes in this story, so many spaces. Again, this story, as I said it before, this story is as featureless and smooth as the alien spacecraft he's describing.
Okay. This is this next clip. This is talking about what Bob did with the craft.
But what did you do while you were there? If you're looking at this object, this reactor, and you can't figure out what it is or how it works, other than the fact that it works on this element that we don't even know about.
Sure. I mean, the thing was what you do in with anything. If you're trying to analyze it, all you can do is perform tests, and all we did is try and come up with every kind of test we possibly could. I mean, we tested, it violated a lot of what we thought was impossible to violate. I mean, one of the first laws of thermodynamics, I mean, essentially any machine, any device that operates always makes extra heat. Nothing works at 100% efficient. Even the headphones you're wearing, anything that takes power, some of that power is going to be converted to heat, and it's just wasted. This didn't. I mean, we looked at, back then we had infrared cameras. They're different today, but back then you had to pour liquid nitrogen into the camera to cool the sensor down and get these infrared images you've seen. But it never got, no matter what the load was on the reactor, it never got above the ambient temperature, which is impossible. I mean, you're, pulling out huge amounts of power and nothing ever gets warm. We tried measuring magnetic fields and there was nothing there. So we started playing around with the emission from the emitters, the gravity wave itself, and saw what we could do with it and how it was focused. So we really spent all our time just trying to see what the stuff can do and what we can control.
So you were seeing what it could do, but you couldn't ever figure out how it was doing it.
No, not really. I mean, we really could only use come up with a best guess. Now, I can't say we really that I could absolutely state for certainty how anything actually worked.
I agree. He will not state for certain how anything actually works in his story. He absolutely won't. He said he spent all his time there running tests on this thing. But again, listen to the lack of specificity. He's talking about what kind of properties, but what tests did they do? He said they looked at it with an infrared camera under various loads. What do you mean by that? What kind of various loads? And how did you get it to undertake these various loads when you weren't able to connect it with anything and you couldn't stress it, you couldn't make it work on anything? Like, what do you mean? What is this test? It's not like we hooked the engine up to a heavy weight and saw what torque we could get out of it as it was dragging a weight. There's not that kind of specificity here. He says they measured magnetic fields, but doesn't tell us what they found or how they measured it or what that kind of significance of that was. He said we messed around with what we could do with the emitters to see what that could do. There's no detail of that. He says really nothing about this that someone with an incredibly basic like grasp of physics, like physics understanding, couldn't already tell you, couldn't make up? Is this really a man speaking with the benefit of a deep insight, of a complex scientific background, an MIT, Caltech scientific background, doing extensive scientific testing and then spending 30 years considering the results? Or is it the kind of things that you and I could hypothesize if we were to sit here and spitball a story that we were going to tell people?
Right. Okay, so the next clip here, this is how it's actually piloted.
Now, how did you know at all how they were piloting it? Because they were doing some tests where they were having these things fly around in the sky, and this is what gets us deeper into your story.
Right. I was out there for one test. Right. In fact, I was with Barry in the lab, and Dennis came in and said, "We're about to run a test. Why don't you guys come out?" Or I think he said, "Barry, why don't you come out here and bring Bob with you?" We went out there, and the craft was already outside the hangar and was just preparing to lift off. Now, they were in communication with somebody in the craft.
So there was a person in the craft?
Yeah, there was certainly a person in there. Now, it's not a comfortable place to be in because it's small. So the guy has to be sitting on the floor in the middle, my best guess.
And this is the same specific craft that you worked on? Because that was the only craft that you were in.
The only one that I touched and worked on. And it quietly lifted off the ground, which was incredibly impressive to see.
Quietly or silently?
Well, quietly, because Did
it make some sort of a noise?
It produced a little corona discharge from the bottom. A corona discharge is kind of a high voltage brush, little bluish glow discharge. As it was lifting off the ground, you can hear a slight hiss sound. Now, as soon as it cleared the ground by about 5 or 10 feet, maybe even less than that, the hissing stopped and the blue glow disappeared. So it lifted off quietly, and then it hovered silently, if you want to be specific.
Wow.
And we do want to be specific. And that was incredibly, I mean, he's talking about 5 or 10 feet. He's talking about exactly what words Dennis said to him and Barry in the exact order of words. So this must have happened because he wouldn't have specified that sentence otherwise. He's much more comfortable giving details here because none of this is going to accidentally stumble into science. This is all just fantasy and storytelling. He's not going to be asked to justify or explain any of this. And like we can tell that because even Joe's questions are the opposite of seeking insight. They're yes-anding without him even realizing he's yes-anding it.
Yeah.
It reminds me when people see a bad hypnotherapist and they produce all sorts of vivid memories because it's actually just the therapist asking leading questions. And Joe is asking one of those leading questions. Did it lift off quietly or silently? Of course, that's going to get elaborated to silent eventually. Yeah. What Bob does in order to make it seem specific as well. You say, was it quiet or silent? It started quiet and then it became silent. So, specific. He's saying that because that's what Joe wants to hear.
I like that they're in the lab working on this thing, and this is the only thing they're allowed to work on. And somehow somebody just like snuck it outside with a pilot that the thing could then fly on. Like, how does that even work? I guess I would just need to know a little bit more about the logistics of your laboratory, but it feels like you do have that stuff down because you know exactly what your boss told you when he wanted you to come see it outside. So
exactly, because they're dealing with the reactor, the propulsion reactor, the energy base for this ship, and it's not kept in the ship because he says he goes in to see where it would normally sit. So did he go into the lab one day and they'd moved the reactor, put it all back together, put it back into the ship, and just did it happen overnight when Barry was sleeping next to it? I don't know.
Just the guy sneaking out of the room with the reactor so he doesn't wake Barry up.
Yeah, just Barry hugging the reactor. They've got to replace it with something of equal size, like a basketball in a box to sort of like roughly be the right kind of size.
It's got a post-it on that says, "Do not cut with plasma torch." Okay. All right. Last clip in the toolbox. This is talking about all the qualities of the alien craft.
So then what kind of maneuvers was it doing?
It took off, for that particular time, it took off, moved a little around to the left and right, and then sat back down. The craft itself they communicated with it with because I saw the guy talking in a regular VHF radio to the person in the craft. And I even saw the frequency that was on the frequency counter of the communication, the transceiver there. But what's weird is he shouldn't be able to communicate with the craft with a radio. The radio wave should bend around the craft. I mean, it shouldn't be possible. Every single thing about the craft and the way they operated didn't make any sense to us. I mean, that's something we talked about for a while after.
Why should the frequency bend around the craft?
Well, you really have to look at the way the gravity wave comes out of the craft. There's the reactor's in the center, and there's a waveguide that goes up to the top. There's actually a small appendage that sticks out of the top of the craft, and it produces a heart-shaped gravitational distortion around the craft. Now, if the craft is sitting in the air and you walk underneath it and look up, you actually cannot see the craft. The light bends around it. You're bending gravity, bends light. It bends radio waves. It shouldn't be possible to communicate with a craft that has an envelope around it that's distorting all forms of energy. But they were apparently in contact with it.
Somehow or another, so through some unexplained way that they didn't bother explaining to you.
Mm-hmm.
And that you won't bother explaining to us.
Yeah, exactly. Exactly that. I mean, what even is this? Again, look, this is the illusion of specificity.
Yeah.
I mean, we know that he was definitely using a radio to talk to him because he saw the exact radio frequency, which means if pushed, he can even tell you what number it is, because that's just a number you can make up if you know radio frequencies vaguely. Except he's not going to do that because then he'd have to remember that radio frequency.
Right.
So he wouldn't do that. He'd just say, oh, I can't remember now. It's just a radio frequency. And then, as you say, he points out that if you walk underneath the ship and you look up, you can't see the craft, it's invisible. He's not actually saying that he's done that. He's just saying that you would do that. But again, what he's talking about, I don't think it makes sense that he's talking about the gravity would bend the light and therefore the craft be invisible. Because what you would have is a massive distortion of what you're looking at as the light from whatever's on the other side of the craft distorts its way around. So yeah, you wouldn't, if this thing was hypothetically possible, it wouldn't be invisible. It would just look like a really massive weird distortion directly above you, like some sort of odd funhouse mirror, which isn't the same as being invisible, but he's not really getting at the details of that. And he's positing that it's completely impossible to communicate with the thing that he's describing, but somehow they were able to, which is amazing in the story that he's telling, that nobody else is telling. Like, he might as well have said it was being piloted by a really small unicorn in the story that he's telling. We've got as much to verify it as that.
Yeah.
And then he's got the convenient, but I don't know how they did it because they didn't tell me. So don't ask any follow-up questions.
Super easy, man. It's super easy. And it being naked, it being invisible to the naked eye really does, I think, it's really convenient, right? Because then you could say, well, they did all kinds of tests with this thing, but there's no way you could have saw it. No matter where you were and what day you were out there, there's no way you're going to see it because first off, it lifts off quietly and then becomes silent. And then afterwards, you can't see it because of the gravity distortion. So there's no way you could see it. So it's like literally Dragon in My Garage stuff that Carl Sagan was talking about. No matter what you do, I can't give you a way in which you could actually see it or you actually verifying it because I'll just keep saying all these things that make it so it's completely unverifiable.
Let's wrap it up with that. Thank you, sir. Appreciate you very much. You're a beautiful person.
Okay, Marsh, here we are. End of the show. Was there anything good in this episode?
Honestly, the only thing I can really think about is the opportunity cost. Like, this could have been so much worse. This could have been someone who was lying about something dangerous. And it's not someone lying about something dangerous at the very least. This is just most watched video. And the closest video to it, and it's actually pretty close, is his interview with Trump.
Yeah.
By comparison to his interview with Trump, this one is actively good. This is Joe at his most stoner, kooky belief kind of thing before he was radicalized during COVID, and it shows. And so for that, it's fine. It's silly. I don't believe it, but it's fine.
When you hear it, like it does sort of build on the lore of the sort of UFO lore that Joe believes. And so it's important to see. But like you say, like there's nothing in it that I think when I heard it, I thought, oh, this is this is something that that is good about it. But I think that there was just a bunch of stuff that really wasn't bad about it, which is fine. So, and in comparison to some of his shows where he can be very dangerous, when he talks about medicine or he talks about supplements or he talks about politics or immigration, all that stuff can be pretty dangerous. But this one felt like it was a lot less that, even if it was just a big story. Okay, that's it for this week. Remember that you can access more than half-hour bonus content every single week for as little as $1 an episode by subscribing at patreon.com/NoRogan. Meanwhile, you can hear more from me, Cognitive Dissonance and Citation Needed, and more from Marsh at Skeptics with a K and the Skeptic podcast. And we're going to be back next week for a little more The No Rogan Experience. If you love the show, please rate and share it. If you want to get in touch with us, become a patron, or check out the show notes, go to NoRogan.com, KNOWROGAN.com.